week between the Canadian and US Grand Prix was a fraught one in the air travel industry. TWA Flight 847 had been hijacked over Greece the day before the Canadian race and on Monday was flown to Beirut. The hijackers were demanding the release of hundreds of mostly Lebanese Shia Muslims in Israeli prisons and the immediate withdrawal of Israel from the country. One of the planned hijackers had been bumped from the flight and taken into custody in Athens, and he was released by the Greek government in exchange for 8 Greek hostages, including singer Demis Roussos, but the rest remained on board, and the hijackers singled out any passengers with Jewish-sounding surnames and any US military personnel, including killing one US Navy diver. While that aircraft remained on the tarmac in Beirut, on Wednesday bombs exploded in Frankfurt airport, killing 2. Investigations later concluded the attack had been made by a Palestinian group aided by Libya. On Friday, Norway suffered its first ever airliner hijacking, with Broughton's Flight 139 en route from Trondheim to Oslo held up with an air pistol by 24-year-old Stein Huseby, a down-on-his-luck alcoholic who said he was just trying to get help, but agreed to trade his gun for more beer when the plane's supply ran out. And on race day, 2 more bombs exploded, this time at Narita Airport in Tokyo and on board Air India Flight 182, killing 2 baggage handlers in Tokyo and all 329 on board the aircraft. This attack was made by the Canadian cell of Sikh separatist terrorist group Baba Khalsa. And just to complete the week's catalogue of terrorism, a series of bombs exploded across Nepal, the first such attacks in that nation's history. 2 different groups claimed responsibility, and it's never been conclusively proved who did it, but several members of the left-wing NJM group, one of the claimed perpetrators, were arrested. So the F1 personnel may have had a nervous eye on their flights home as the trucks rolled from Montreal to Detroit. As planned, Carl Haas launched his new team officially in the Motor City, planning to make their debut at Monza, and Ford also unveiled their plans for a new V6 turbo engine, designed by Cosworth, and with a 3-year exclusive contract for Haas & Co. beginning in 1986. It was just as well for the Ford concern, as Ken Tyrrell's boys were due to debut their new Renault engines at the next race in France, so this could be the swan song for the long-running DFV and DFY family of Cosworth V8s. And then, with no further ado, it was time for the 4th Detroit Grand Prix. For the first time in 10 years, the United States would only have 1 race. There had been a couple of minor tweaks to the layout since the previous year, with the turn 7 and 8 complex being slowed a little, but it was still bumpy and unforgiving, and took a bit of running in to get a good adhesive surface down, so Friday qualifying is always a bit of a lottery as teams try to dial in the settings and the drivers get the hang of the track. The nimble Lotus 97T was eminently suited to the circuit, and Senna made the best of the early running, albeit still over a second behind Piquet's 1984 pole time. The Williams boys split the difference on tyres, with Mansell going on the soft race compound Goodyears and Rosberg on sticky qualifiers, while there were the usual parade of shunts, bumps and crashes. The Arrows team were particularly put out when Berger bounced off Patrace's Alfa Romeo, and then the Marshals bent it even further by dinging it off a wall on the crane and then dropping it. Prost, meanwhile, crashed hard and hurt his right hand. And then it rained on Saturday, hard, meaning that the Friday's times would be final. Only 5 drivers even bothered going out at all, including Berger, who hadn't managed to set a time on Friday, but whose mechanics had managed to rebuild his car overnight. His time was 23 seconds off pole, thanks to the rain, but with only 25 starters he would definitely start. So it was Ayrton Senna on pole, his 4th in 6 races so far this year, with Nigel Mansell alongside, then Alboreto and Prost on row 2, then Rosberg and Warwick. Giva was 7th, De Angelis 8th after pranging his Lotus on Friday and having to use the spare, then Johansson 9th. The Brabhams were 10th and 11th, an improvement for Sura, with Lauda 12th. Tombe was back in 14th, having been the one De Angelis crashed into, and also needing to qualify in the spare, and Pierluigi Martini could be very grateful that everyone was guaranteed to qualify, as the only time he managed to post across the 2 days was over 3 minutes, almost a full lap slower than Senna's pole time. Thankfully, by Sunday morning the sun was blazing again, and the teams were able to set up for dry conditions, though they had a whole day's less data to work with than they would have liked. Rosberg elected to use the soft Goodyear compound that Mansell had done well on, but most others started on medium or hard tyres, and those teams with carbon fibre brakes were also having cooling issues. Mansell had blotted his copybook at the start last year and was under pressure not to repeat the feat as the red lights came on. The greens followed, and off they went. A clean start at Detroit for a change, with Mansell getting a flyer and going into the lead ahead of Senna, with Rosberg also moving up a place to 4th behind Prost. Mansell didn't lead for long though, as Senna went back through at the next corner, and as Ghinzani became the first victim of the unforgiving walls, Rosberg took third from Prost and then second from Mansell in fairly short order. Cheever was running fifth briefly but pitted early on, so the lead four were now chased by Alboreto, Warwick, De Angelis, Johansson and Lauda. Keke, on his softer tyres, was quickly on Senna's gearbox and the pair were swiftly leaving Mansell behind, while Prost was having to defend against Alboreto and De Angelis got ahead of Warwick's Renault off camera and started to catch the Ferrari. Winkelhock blew his Hart turbo on lap 4 and Fabi's clutch went a lap later, and while the cameras watched Rosberg's pursuit of Senna, Alboreto got past Prost and pulled away, leaving Alain with Warwick and Johansson both breathing down his neck, and these two swapped places as Johansson made a brave move stick round the back of the course. While the cameras were watching that, Rosberg got ahead of Senna for the lead on lap 9 and quickly started to pull away, and Senna, again off camera, pitted to change his hard A compounds for softer Bs. Unfortunately, the team didn't get the message, stuck another set of A's on, assuming he had some sort of problem. He shouted that it was Bs he wanted and haired off, saying he'd be back in a few laps, and the Lotus mechanics scrambled to get them ready. Senna's teammate De Angelis, meanwhile, had renewed hostilities with Alboreto, trying to get past the Ferrari for third, but just as he pulled out to make his move, the TV coverage cut away to Chris Economaki in the pits explaining what had gone on with Senna's car, and when they returned to the track he was solidly third and pulling away. Niki Lauda's miserable 1985 continued as his brakes gave up after just 10 laps, and a lap later Martini's race was also run with a Motori Moderni engine failure. His own brakes were playing up a bit, and he was worried about fuel consumption, so he just drove at his own pace and let Johansson come by, the cameras looking the right way for once. That made it Rosberg, Mansell, De Angelis, Alboreto, Johansson and Prost in the top 6. Been a while since there'd been two Williamses at the front. Senna's pointless stop had dropped him to 14th and he was still trying to make up ground, though he was at least still on the lead lap. Mansell was struggling to keep pace with Rosberg, having opted for the harder A compounds, while further back the Tyrrells were moving up in formation, now 9th and 10th with their light nimble cars. Turn 3 was already starting to break up after 15 laps, as Senna slid ever so slightly wide and dislodged a stack of tyres off the barrier onto the track, which was cleared off by brave marshals just in time as Tombe lost the back of the Renault at the same place, nearly collected Ciura head-on as he recovered, and made a risky move off into the escape road to retire with a rather askew left rear tyre. 3 laps later, his teammate Warwick joined him in retirement after his gearbox broke. Prost lost another place to Brundle, Mansell had a spin into an escape road, losing second to De Angelis, and then it was Prost's turn to hit the marbles at turn 3 under pressure from Beloff and go nose first into the barriers. It was only 1/3 distance and 9 cars were out already, and, while CBS were showing a film about the history of the DFV engine right in the middle of the race, Mansell had another spin and dropped further back behind Johansson, with Alboreto also finding it tough going and losing 5th to a still charging Brundle, which became 4th when Mansell pitted for new tyres. They didn't help, and Nigel became the next victim of turn 3 on his 27th lap, wrenching his arm as the steering wheel was jerked out of his grip. While CBS were off getting an update from Dan Rather on the Beirut hostage situation, De Angelis tangled with Berger as he tried to lap the arrows and had to come in for a new nose cone, which put the Ferraris now up to 2nd and 3rd with the Tyrrells behind them, and Senna now back up into the points as the race approached half distance. Brundle and Beloff were going great guns in the Tyrrell still, especially given Stefan was missing a chunk of his nose bodywork after an early tangle, which ironically might have actually helped him, as the holes in the carbon fibre chassis were now allowing air in to cool his feet, which could actually be seen moving in some shots. On lap 30 it all came unstuck for Brundle, as he went to lap Alio, who moved over to take his line for the corner and stuffed him into the wall. Neither driver was particularly contrite afterwards.
I'm afraid Philippe Alliot wasn't looking in his mirrors or he's asleep or something, just moved straight over on me.
He was behind me, I jumped on my car and broke my car and his car. I think he's a little crazy.
And all the time Rosberg was still going strong, with a lead of 34 seconds over Johansson, though he'd picked up some litter in his side pods and was having to keep an eye on his temperature gauge. On lap 46, it got high enough for him to come in and get it removed, and the Williams team also changed his rear tyres for good measure. The Finn rejoining in the lead, but with Johansson now not so far behind. But although Johansson now had Rosberg in sight ahead of him, the Ferrari's brakes were starting to wear and Stefan wasn't able to make headway, especially when he got stuck behind Andrea de Cesaris for several laps. Senna, meanwhile, had got past Beloff and was closing on third-placed Alboreto. He too was on fading brakes and was having to give them a pump to get pressure up before every corner. As he caught Alboreto, The canny Italian took the inside line, forcing Senna round the outside, onto the marbles. The brakes didn't work, and he was in the wall. "I goofed," he said later. In the closing stages, one of Johansson's brake discs exploded and Stefan had to settle for cruising round to finish, while Beloff caught right up to Alboreto with 2 laps to go and looked like he might nick third until his clutch started to slip and he had to ease off to make the flag. And so, when the 63 laps were done, Keke Rosberg had his 4th career win, Stefan Johansson his 2nd consecutive runner-up spot, and Alboreto consolidated his championship lead with 3rd. Stefan Beloff brought his stripped-down Tyrrell home 4th to sign the Cosworth V8 off with a good finish. De Angelis trailed in 5th and last man on the lead lap for 6 points finishes out of 6, and Nelson Piquet and Brabham BMW finally opened their 1985 accounts with the last point on offer. Once more, the Detroit circuit had provided a spectacle as entertaining for the neutral as it was frustrating for the teams and drivers, and Keke Rosberg had once again shown himself to be the master of the street circuit. 3 of his 4 wins had come between the walls of Detroit, Dallas and Monaco.